It is so amazing how this all comes together when we really start recognizing that our come from, our intention is everything. When we start to realize that we're here to emerge out into the world as love, the love that we truly are, we begin to become curious about how we can embrace and infuse that love into everything around us. Hello again, and welcome back to the Art of Awakening podcast, where the art of living awake becomes a daily practice. I'm your host, Dr. Sue Morter, and today we have a very special guest. It's my great joy to bring to you Dr. Margaret Paul. So she's a best-selling author and the co-creator of Inner Bonding, which we're going to hear about today, and which is a self-healing process that has helped countless individuals reconnect and transform their lives. And she holds a PhD in psychology and is a relationships expert, noted public speaker, workshop leader, educator, chaplain, consultant, artist, and somebody you want to know. All right. So I just have to tell you a little bit about the fact that I know this dear woman personally, and she has been an amazing presence in my life and in the lives of some dear friends of mine as well. I've also co-taught with her in conferences um, over the years, and it's just been a great joy to know her. She is wise even beyond her years, and she is definitely here from experience in her own life and turning her own life into an amazing experience to be living. And I so look forward to sharing her with you. Through her decades of work, she's guided countless people toward greater wholeness in their relationships, in their health, and their connection to life itself. And I know that you're going to love knowing Margaret. So, Margaret, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, it's always a joy to, everybody, I just want you to grab a cup of tea and sit down because this is something that is going to be deeply meaningful for you in your life. And so it always feels like I'm doing that, Margaret, when I'm with you, whether I get to have tea in my hand or not. So, all right, I'd love to start by sharing with our listeners a little bit about your journey for those that are new to your work. Um, what led you to create a process called inner bonding, and how has it evolved over the years?
So that's a bit of a story. I was kind of a messed up kid, a lot of problems. And when I was 5 years old, my mother took me to a psychiatrist, and he talked to me and he talked to her, and then he talked to both of us, and he said to me, "Tell your mother not to yell at you." My mother was a screamer, and I thought to myself at five, "You tell her. I'm only 5 years old. She's not going to listen to me." And then my next thought was, "I can do a better job than you." So at 5 years old is when I decided that this is the work that I wanted to do, and I never veered from it. So then I became a traditional psychotherapist for 17 years. I had tons of my own therapy, and I wasn't happy with my own therapy, and I wasn't happy with what I was doing with people. So after 17 years, I started basically to pray for a teacher or a process or something that would really work, not just traditional talk therapy, but something that would really work. And that's when I met Dr. Erica Chopich. She had half of inner bonding. I had half of inner bonding. Of course, we had to meet, and Spirit helped us put together these very powerful 6 steps. That was almost 42 years ago. And so it's been evolving ever since then, and it's changed my life completely.
Oh my goodness. So, I'm still back on, okay, so you're 4 or 5 years old and someone's telling your mother and you could have done a better job, of explaining things. And so let's just take a moment here and say, what part of you was present then in that moment? What do you think it was that had you at such a young age realizing, hey, 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 there's a way of being here that we could be being that would work. Can you just try to describe that to people? But here's why I'm asking this. Everyone has a greater knower deep inside. And most of us override it because the big people around, the important people or the powerful people or our parents at the time just were, the boss. And so, what was it that allowed you to tap into that enough to acknowledge that at that age?
I just knew that his advice was wrong. I mean, I had my own experience of my mother's anger, and I knew that there was telling her not to yell at me wasn't going to do anything. And so I had a deep knowing that what he was telling me wasn't going to help me at all. And it didn't, because my mother wouldn't listen to me. And so I knew that if he, I thought maybe if he told her instead of telling me to tell her, that that would work a lot better because he had more authority than I did. So I had that knowing that this just wasn't going to work, that I knew what to do better than he knew what to do at that moment. And I was always the kind of kid that people came to, even before 5. People just always came to me. And so that's what I came on the planet to do. And I always loved to help people. And so when I was exposed to an actual therapist, it then gave me the knowing that I could do this, that this is what I wanted to do. I mean, I didn't even know about professions at that time. And so when I realized that this was a psychiatrist and that I could learn and help people, I knew that was it. That was it. It was a very, very deep knowing.
And that was your path. That was your way of revealing this deep wisdom that's inside of you to go that route. And I just want
Well,
all of our
and I've been doing it now for 58 years, and I'm not tired of it. I don't get burned out. I think when you're on your true path, you don't get burned out.
Exactly. I speak with people all the time that are just so tired and they're so exhausted and they're so frustrated with what's happening in the world today and they just want to retire. They just want to get away from all of the all. And I don't feel that way at all. I feel like I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
And I see that spark of inspiration in you and I feel it in you that you're in your dharma. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I feel like when people allow themselves to explore they can find ways of expressing in the world that are their dharma. It's their true path, whether it's a vocation or just a way of being. And I know that what you're doing is really aligning people and helping them find that version of themselves by going back and picking up some of the pieces they skipped over. So we're going to get to that. Um, so you've shared that many of us feel disconnected from ourselves, and I know that that's really what you were witnessing at 5 years old. You were seeing the disconnect, and you were like, "Wait a second, there's another way of doing this that is gonna work better." And so you became exposed to someone who was living closer and closer to that, and you knew that's what you wanted for yourself too. So what happened for you, um, is that you developed this inner bonding process as a byproduct of all of that. So can you just explain a little bit about how inner bonding helps us begin to reconnect with the true self, our true path, our true dharma, and experience true healing?
Yeah,
Or
so many of us as we were growing up, we had to disconnect from our bodies because there was nobody there to help with the pain. The pain is in the body. And so we basically learned to go up in our head and not feel. We dissociated from our feelings. Well, that's fine as a child to get through, but it's not fine as an adult. And so step one of inner bonding is reconnecting with your body, reconnecting with your feelings, and recognizing that our feelings have vital information for us. We divide feelings into wounded feelings and existential feelings. The wounded feelings are the ones that we cause by how we treat ourselves, by abandoning and rejecting ourselves in various ways. And this is the anxiety and depression and guilt and shame and anger and aloneness and emptiness and jealousy and envy and resentment. These kinds of feelings we cause by not seeing ourselves, not valuing ourselves, not loving ourselves, not learning to be a loving mom and dad to ourselves. And then there's the feelings of life, like somebody is mean to you, or you lose somebody you love, or you got huge financial problems. And those are like the grief and the heartbreak and the helplessness over others and outcomes, and the deep sorrow, and those are the kinds of the loneliness that we can feel when people are not connecting to us. These are the feelings of life. And what happened to us as we were growing up is we had a lot of these feelings. We couldn't manage them. And so we learned to dissociate. Now we need to be willing to feel these feelings and learn to take responsibility for them with deep compassion. Inner bonding is about learning to be compassionate towards ourselves. And it has to start with wanting responsibility for our feelings. And so that's step one. And step two, inner bonding is based on a concept of intention, and that we make it easy. There's only two intentions. One is the intention to learn about loving ourselves and sharing our love with others. The other is the intention to protect against pain with various forms of controlling behavior. Virtually all of us, we develop what we call the wounded self to try and protect us against pain. And again, that was a survival mechanism. We needed to learn to do that when we were growing up. But it doesn't serve us well now, especially in relationships where we're trying to control getting love rather than learning to love ourselves and share our love with each other. So in step two, we consciously choose the intention to learn, and we teach people, as you do, to connect with a higher source of love and to bring that love and compassion and strength and wisdom into their heart. And that's what we call being a loving adult. When we're open to learning and we're connected with the beautiful qualities of spirit, we're operating as a loving adult. And this is where we need to be in order to do the inner work. It's like if you're upset with a child and you say to the child, well, what's wrong with you? The child is not going to tell you anything. But if you're kind and you're caring, you say, honey, I love you. I'd like to understand what's happening. That child might feel safe enough to let you in. Well, we're doing the same thing on the inner level. We call our soul, our true self, our inner child. And this is the feeling part of us. This part of us often communicates through feelings. And so in step three, we go back into the feelings. And now we're open and we're curious. And we're asking, is there something, some way I'm treating you from my ego wounded self? Because a loving adult would not be abandoning us or rejecting us, but the wounded self is programmed to do that. Is there something I'm telling you, some way I'm treating you from my wounded self that's causing you to feel anxious or angry or depressed or guilty or whatever that wounded feeling is? And then we go inside. And if we're at all trustworthy towards ourselves, that inner child will feel free to say, yeah, and tell us what we're doing. Maybe when we went inside, we felt anxious, which is so common today, so much anxiety. And so the inner child might say, well, yeah, you're judging me. You're telling me I'm not good enough. You're putting a lot of pressure on me. You're telling me I better not make a mistake. I better be perfect. I better do everything right. I have to get others' approval. If I don't get others' approval, I'm not okay. Things like that. Those are a lot of false beliefs coming from the wounded self. And as we become aware of that, then we go deeper into that ego wounded place of ours that holds our false beliefs. And we ask, there must be a good reason that we're rejecting ourselves, we're judging ourselves, we're ignoring ourselves, we're numbing out with addictions, whatever it is we're doing that's hurting us, or we're blaming others and making them responsible. What do we hope to control or avoid or protect against? And this is where we become aware of our false beliefs. And this is so important because they're usually subconscious or unconscious, but they're running our lives. And so we need to become aware of them. And inner bonding is a wonderful process for becoming aware. And once we do become aware, then we go to step four, which is opening to our higher guidance, asking for the truth about any beliefs that we've uncovered, and then asking a very important question that I encourage people to ask throughout the day. What's loving to me right now? What's loving to my inner child right now? And then being willing to do it, to take the action in step five. It could be all sorts of things. It could be just being compassionate, holding ourselves, hugging ourselves, being gentle and tender. It could be speaking up with somebody. It could be changing our diet, getting some exercise, getting to bed early, looking into changing jobs. I mean, it could be all sorts of things. But if we don't take action, then the first four steps aren't going to get us anywhere. It's taking action on what's loving to ourselves that then helps us to gain a sense of self-worth. I mean, people can look in the mirror and they can do affirmations and they can say, you're a beautiful, loving child of God. But then if they're judging themselves and ignoring their feelings, they're not going to feel that way. And so it's about learning to treat ourselves with caring, with respect, and really taking responsibility for most of our feelings other than, the existential ones. Even those we need to be compassionate about. And then finally, in step 6, we go back in and see how we're feeling. And if we've been loving to ourselves, caring about ourselves, we're going to feel a lot of relief. We're going to feel a relief of anxiety or depression or guilt or shame or any of the other feelings. So that's a very brief overview of inner bonding.
Fabulous. So I caught something in your description that I hadn't heard before when I'd heard you speaking about this, and you equated the inner child with the soulful
Right,
presence. And
right,
I think that in our audience it's really helpful to understand that this is the case, that that when we are arriving here as this pure, present, soulful self, it is innocent, it is pure, it doesn't have its legs on yet to be in the physical world, and so it has been referred to as the inner child. And if we could equate it with the soulful self, it starts to kind of bridge the worlds of a vernacular that's building in human, in the human consciousness, in the field of personal development and spiritual development today, that is that I think is very important. That we understand the soul to have these qualities of the innocence and the purity of
right,
a child, and that child innocence is also what is referred to as that which will get us through the realms and into heaven's gate, or, that will ultimately open up infinite possibilities for us. And so now what we're talking about here is this relationship between the personality and the soulful self. And you're referencing it as this ego, fear based, protective version of us, and this inner wounded child. And it's sort of the same conversation, the same two principles that we're trying to bridge together and allow them to meet each other again. So
yeah,
so it's
yeah. So
beautiful, this process that you're delivering to do that.
yeah. So the wounded self can be a wounded child, it can be a wounded infant, it can be a wounded toddler, it can be a wounded adolescent. We call it the wounded self because it could have so many different ages depending on when we learned a particular false belief or a particular way of avoiding particular addiction, way of avoiding our painful feelings. And so we have that wounded part of us, that wounded, even pre-birth can be a wounded fetus and wounded, and then maybe the mother didn't want the child and the child already feels that
Mhm.
and already establishes beliefs about that. And so we have this wounded self, this wounded child, this wounded adolescent. What you're talking about with the soul is like the wonder child. It's and the reason we call that an inner child, the soul often speaks to us through feelings, and they're instant. And so many of us have learned to avoid, not pay attention, or not believe what our feelings are telling you. And they're usually telling us that we're either loving ourselves or we're abandoning ourselves, or somebody else is dangerous or somebody else is open. That they have very important information for us. Most people don't think about taking responsibility for their feelings, but they do think about taking responsibility for a child. And so, because the soul often communicates through feelings, it can be helpful to think of the soul as the beautiful, wonderful inner child, because we know we're responsible for that. And the more we learn to take responsibility for our feelings, the better we feel. And the more we learn to see and value who we are as a soul. This is one of the things that is so helpful in inner bonding, is that, and I'm sure you do the same thing, is that as people learn to connect with their spiritual guidance, they learn to see their soul through the eyes of truth, because our wounded self can't see who we are in our soul. Our wounded self is the part of us that says, "You're not good enough. What's the matter with you? You did this wrong. You better be perfect," all that. But our higher guidance adores us, loves us, sees us. And the more that we can see ourselves through the eyes of our spiritual guidance, the more we value who we are. And the more we value who we are, the easier it becomes to take loving care of ourselves. It's like a parent who adores a child. There's no problem taking care of the child because they love the child. If they don't love the child, then they probably don't take good care of the child. And that's what's happening with us. If we don't really see and value this incredible spark of the divine that's within each of us, and see our individual gifts and truly value those, then it's hard to think about really loving ourselves. So it becomes so important that people learn to define who they are, who their true inner child, their true soul is.
Hmm. And so you speak about intention. And when we come to any moment, we have one of two intentions. And I think that this is going to be really valuable for us to speak about because what we're talking about is bridging the higher guidance and this deep, intimate, soulful self. And what stands between them is this bridge that we're operating as either, as a personality that is infused with the idea based on beliefs and past experiences that I need to protect myself, I need to guard, and I need to win. I need to make you wrong so I can be right, or something
That's
along those
right.
lines. Or that bridge in between these two worlds is interested in learning all about it, all about what's going on in this inner child realm, in this reality of the soul incarnating in this body deep in my core, and this superconscious self, the divine God source, higher guidance. However, that if I'm going to be the bridge between these two, the best bridge I could be is one that's interested in learning what these two realms have in common and how we can all become one because,
That's
that's
right.
that's really what I'm all about in the world. Um so talk to us a little bit about these two intentions that the personality comes, do they come to a do they show up or do they come to a showdown to see who's going to win? Just tell us a little bit about how someone can recognize if they're coming from one or the other.
So it's actually their feelings. So, if they're feeling anything other than full inside and peaceful and joyful, then they know they're operating out of their wounded self, because then they're feeling, numbed out, or they're feeling anxious or depressed, or all these wounded feelings. And so your feelings instantly tell you which intention you're operating from. And it's your intention that activates either that ego wounded part of us or the loving adult part of us. We get to choose our intention. That is the essence of free will. So when we choose the intention to learn about loving ourselves and others, that activates our loving adult. It raises our frequency and enables us to connect with our higher guidance. And the way that I see the guidance is like our soul is really, really big, and we're within our soul, but our soul is also within us as that inner child. And so they're connected, of course, because we have our soul within and our soul without. And that oneness comes when we operate as a loving adult, and we're open to learning, and we're going to spirit, and we're going to our inner child inside in a kind of a flow where we're present for our inner experience, and we're present for our higher experience. And that's what creates the peace, the joy, the love. That's what fills us with love, so
Mhm.
that then we have love to share. And that's also what allows us to know who we are as that kind of connection. And what I found is that the more we feel that oneness within ourselves, the easier it becomes to feel it with everybody, to see their beautiful soul, to feel the oneness, whether it's with people or plants or animals or trees or Mother Nature, whatever. But it becomes so easy when we really see and value ourselves to feel that oneness with all of life. And of course, that's what we're needing right now so badly, is for people to feel that oneness with each other and be there for each other. I mean, that's what's so disturbing about what's happening today is the division, the separation, that some people are good and some people are bad. But when you're really doing your inner work and valuing yourself, that's not that's not where we operate from.
Mhm. So when someone is feeling, hopeless or powerless or frustrated or angry, or shut down in some way, you're basically sharing that they've slipped into an orientation of coming from or living, being seated as this wounded collection of past experiences and disconnections and so forth, and so they're experiencing life
Right, right. That's
from
right.
that perspective. That's just what's happening, right?
That's
So
what's happening.
so what happens? Somebody wakes up one day and they're just like depressed. They're disconnected. They feel lost and confused. And of course, the things that are coming, across the media, whether it's television or streaming something or reading something that comes in from a news, broadcast or an article in the paper, um, you know, they're they're being bombarded, and so there's an invitation into these deep, dark spaces. Um, what happens in your perspective that allows someone to get lost in that? Why are they dwelling? Why do they stay even though they heard those things maybe, days ago or weeks ago? What keeps them just reliving it over and over and over?
I think a lot of people have been programmed to believe that their feelings, that these kinds of feelings like depression or anxiety, are basically coming from external circumstances. And so they get stuck. If it's external, then of course they're helpless. Of course they're powerless. But when we were infants, we were helpless over others and we were helpless over ourselves. But as adults, we're still helpless over others, but we're not helpless over ourselves. And so if somebody believes that these feelings are coming from what's happening in the world, then they're going to feel like a victim. They're going to feel helpless and hopeless over doing anything. But if they recognize that those kinds of feelings, I'm not talking about the existential pain of the grief of what's happening or the heartbreak, because that's real, and we need to be very compassionate about that. I mean, that's the reality of our lives at this point, but I'm talking about those feelings like depression and anxiety that so many people have. We're not helpless over those. Those are actually being caused internally, not externally. Um, and so that's what inner bonding is about. It's about really being present with the depression and opening to learning about how we're treating ourselves, what you're telling ourselves. Maybe you're telling yourself, oh, the world is always going to be like this forever and ever, and it's always going to be awful. Well, you know what? The wounded self likes to think that it can predict the future. That's what happens a lot. It thinks it can predict the future when it can't. It knows nothing about it. And so, but if it's telling you things like that, it's going to make you depressed.
Mhm.
That's very different. That's very different than the heartbreak of what's going on, though.
Can you say more about that? About
So
the
I'll
difference?
give you an example.
Mm.
I heard last night something that was so disturbing to me about the Supreme Court saying that it's okay for ICE to go knock down doors to get to people. Well, to me, I just started to cry. I mean, that was so heartbreaking. It brought up so much deep grief for me that people would treat people this way. But I didn't get depressed by it. There's a big difference. I got heartbroken. I held my heart. I cried. I felt my helplessness over people treating other people that way. I moved it through with compassion. I let myself cry about it for as long as I needed to. And with very much tenderness and compassion, it lifted up, and then I was fine. I don't feel depressed. That's different. If I would have then gone into my wounded self and said, oh, well, this is just the way the world is, and it's always going to be this way, and there's nothing I can do, that would have been depressing, but that isn't what I do. I don't go there. I say, okay, this is what's happening. My job is to keep myself in as high a frequency as I can, to be adding as much light to the planet as I can. And I believe that if each of us were doing that, we would really be able to help our planet. And so I don't feel helpless and I don't feel depressed. But that's information that I've gotten from my guidance that to me has much more reality than what my wounded self would tell me, which usually is just lies that scare me and make me feel anxious and depressed. So I really try not to go there. The minute I feel that, I do my inner bonding work. I don't want to go there.
So it's sort of like the wounded self starts worst case scenarioing so it can build a case for itself to protect and to guard and to be prepared. But the problem is it generates this vibrational frequency within us that, because we're running this worst case scenario through our minds, is that it keeps us in that state of alert and alarm and doesn't move us toward healing at all. So what you're saying is when we come with an intention to learn, something else happens. What is it that happens in the mind of someone who's interested in learning versus protecting?
Well, it's a completely different part of us that's in charge because as soon as we want to protect, then we're going into the past, we're going into our old fears, our old false beliefs, all the protections we've learned along the way. When we're open to learning, it's open-ended. We really want to know what the truth is. We really want to know what's loving to ourselves. That's what being open to learning is about. And if somebody is truly open to learning about love, that raises their frequency and helps them connect with their guidance. The other thing that helps with frequency is eating clean, unprocessed, non-factory farm foods, because if people are eating junk, putting junk in their body with a lot of sugar and stuff, that it's hard on the body and it lowers the frequency of the body. And so what I found is that what helps people really access their guidance is number one, being in a true intention to learn, and then loving themselves enough to feed themselves well will really help their frequency. But when they're opening to learning, they start to receive information, whether it's from their soul on the inside, their soul all around them, but they start to receive information that will make them feel a whole lot better. They're not going to receive scary information from spirit. Spirit doesn't do that. That's the wounded self that does that. And so once they shift their intention, that's the essence of what we can control, is our own intention. We can't control events, we can't control people or situations, but we have total control over our own intention. And so when we consciously choose an intention to learn, it just opens up so much truth and opens us to what would be loving to us. It's like if you have a baby who's crying and the baby can't tell you what's wrong, but you love the baby and you pick the baby up and I did this kind of automatically with my first son when he was born. He would cry. I didn't know what he wanted. And so I was unconsciously saying, well, does he need to be fed? Does he need to be rocked? Does he have pain? Does he need to be changed? And then I would get ideas about what he needs, and then I would do them. It's kind of the same thing with ourselves. We're asking, what does this inner child need from us right now in order to feel safe and to feel loved? And so the moment we truly shift our intention, just like a mother with a baby really wants to know, we start to get ideas, regardless of whether we believe we're tapping into spirit or not. Ideas start to come in when we're truly open to learning.
Yes, and so it is so amazing how this all comes together when we really start recognizing that our come from, our intention is everything. When we start to realize that we're here to emerge out into the world as love, the love that we truly are, um, we begin to become curious about how we can embrace and infuse that love into everything around us. And so you have definitely developed a system for people to be able to do that when they're in the hot moment of upset and disillusionment, etc. So, what do you find that inner bonding has helped, that has surprised you? What kinds of things have you seen it do that have been really wonderful to witness as a facilitator of this?
So there's a lot of things. First of all, on the physical level, I often see people healing because sometimes when we're ignoring our inner child, then the symptoms start to show up physically. And when we learn to really pay attention and learn to take care of ourselves, I've seen people recover from many different illnesses as they learn to love themselves. The other thing that has been so gratifying for me is what happens with relationships because we come in with our baggage, we fall in love with each other's soul or true self, but then we get together and the wounded self inevitably takes over with everybody because we're programmed to be responding to any feeling of threat with our wounded self. And so that, of course, creates problems. One person's wounded self triggers another person's wounded self, and they're often running. They're either fighting or they're distant. One's trying to control, the other's giving themselves up. One tries to control, the other resists and withdraws. These systems get deeply entrenched. But I've been working with couples for so long now, and I see the system really quickly. In fact, usually within the first session, I can see the system. I can see what each person's wounded self is doing. And so then I'll work with each of them or just one person. If it's one person out of the relationship that's working with me, I'll work with their end of the system because even one person changing their end of the system changes the whole system. But it's great when I'm working with both people and they're each working on their own end of the system. They're working on either their overt control, their anger, their blame, their covert control, giving themselves up, complying, resisting, withdrawing. And as they learn to take loving care of themselves and take responsibility for their own feelings, and they tap into wanting to share love rather than trying to have control over getting love, their relationship improves. And I've seen people, for example, who haven't made love in 10 years suddenly be back into a sexual relationship because there's the emotional intimacy that is generated when both people are open to learning and they're using their conflicts to learn rather than to win. And so that's been so gratifying for me. I love working with couples. I love working with families. I love working with systems because, as I said, I see it really quickly. And if people really want to make changes, they can do it quite rapidly if they're willing to be aware of what they're doing without judging themselves for it, just becoming aware so that they have the choice to make a change.
Mhm. So, what's a first step for someone who is just, out of sorts? Maybe they're dealing with something that is a loss that has happened years ago, and it always cycles around and gets the best of them and takes them out of commission. And then they start on that downward cycle. They attract things into their lives that are not loving and not supportive because they're in that. So, let's say they're in this whole spiral. What's the first thing to do? Other than call you. I mean, they're gonna do that, but in addition to that.
Okay, yeah, call me and I'll help them through it. But other than that, what they want to do is is move toward the feeling. What people tend to do is try and move away from the feeling. They don't want to feel this way, so they'll do things. They'll stay up in their head instead of in their body. They'll judge themselves. They'll numb out with addictions. They'll eat too much, drink too much, whatever. They'll blame somebody or something, and that keeps them stuck. Those are major forms of self-abandonment. But if they move toward the feelings, like I said, like a baby crying, they move toward their feelings. They move toward the feelings with compassion, with a desire to learn. That in itself is going to shift them, because it's a completely different inner experience to try to avoid our feelings than it is to move toward the feeling, like picking up a crying baby and being there to soothe. And so that's the first thing they would do, is move toward their feelings with compassion for themselves, not with judgment, not with numbing, not with blaming, but with compassion. That's the first thing they can do that will start to move them out of that place.
Mm. Absolutely. So beautiful. So, there when it comes down to the application of these principles, that's the most important thing, is that there's a moment where we just turn inward and are tender with ourselves. Like we just care to explore. And I think that your system is a beautiful way of finding that disposition and then giving them the tools, the instruction manual of step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5 to move step by step towards something that's going to create this reconnection in such a beautiful way. So, you've also talked about connecting with a higher guidance, and that's essential for, living in alignment with this love and healing. Can you say a little bit more about that, just to explain to our listeners what that higher self or that higher guidance might look like, might feel like, might be in their deeply internal process. So they're in the midst of this, they're trying to do something that's loving for themselves, and they're connecting and asking, what do you need? And offering that up. And then there's this moment where they reach for their higher guidance, and just talk a little bit about what happens right in that moment.
Yeah, so a lot of people have a misconception that their guidance is going to just talk to them like a person talks, or that they're going to get, something loud or definitive. But it's my experience that guidance is quite subtle. The wound itself is loud. The wound itself is like a kid with a megaphone blaring out what's wrong with us and what we should be doing to protect ourselves. But spirit is quiet and subtle, and so it does mean that we're present and that we're open. I often ask people to imagine being in a beautiful place in nature, because nature has a high frequency, and imagine like an older, wiser part of themselves. Because a lot of people have had spiritual abuse, where if they imagine an angel or God, they think that it's punishing or whatever. But if they imagine an older, wiser part of them, their own higher self, they might not have as many false beliefs. Unfortunately, a lot of people have a lot of spiritual abuse that keeps them from connecting. They might think that their guidance is going to try and control them, which never happens. And so I suggest, if people are having trouble connecting with their guidance, go out in nature, because, like I said, nature has a high frequency. Um, do a few minutes of meditation. Be with a tree. Be with plants. Make sure that you're feeding yourself well and not putting junk in, and make sure you're open to learning. And then it's a matter of learning to trust what you're hearing. When I first started to do this, I had no spiritual background at all. None. No religious, no spiritual, nothing. And so I had to find my own way. And when I first started to get an inkling of my guidance, and hearing the words, or feeling the feelings, or getting images, I didn't trust it. I thought I was making it up. And so what I did is very consciously tested it out. Sometimes I would listen and see what happens, and sometimes I would not listen and see what happens. And invariably, when I listened, things went much better for me than when I didn't listen. And so it was a process of learning to trust that quiet voice of spirit. Everybody can do this if they're willing to really open, they're willing to feed themselves well, and they're willing to test it out and learn to trust.
It's so beautiful. And so I'm back to the 5-year-old now that has her finger on the pulse of what really works in the world and what doesn't. And now you're testing spirit. You're like, okay, I'm gonna listen to you, and this time I'm not gonna listen to you, and we're gonna see what happens. So, this This spirit of inquiry, I think, is so valuable and so important. We need to be curious and inquisitive about life, and in the midst of truly being inquisitive, we need to open up and allow for something new to enter into our lives. And if that is the idea of a higher self and a higher spiritual guidance, and to truly accept there's something here for me. There's something here actually for me that's in my favor, that's serving my upliftment and my unfoldment. I think it can just absolutely be life changing. It's certainly the case in my world too. Um, so, Margaret, how do people reach you? What do they do? How do they get involved with you? What's the deal?
Yeah, so they can go to innerbonding.com. If they want an appointment with me, they can email Jillian at innerbonding.com or me at innerbonding, Margaret at innerbonding.com. They can take our free course on our website and get the overview of inner bonding. I have 15 published books, so they can learn it from books. I have a master circle that meets every other week or twice a month where they can learn inner bonding and work with me live. Um, so they can work with me, or I have many trained facilitators they can work with if they want to work personally. I have a group that that replenishes every 6 weeks. So there's many ways. And then I have 5 30-day courses. I have one called Love Yourself, which is one of the best ways of learning inner bonding, learning to really love yourself. So it's all on the website at innerbonding.com. There's many ways of learning and getting support with this
Oh,
process.
fabulous. There's nothing quite like being in the experience of doing the work than, far above and beyond just, learning about it. So I definitely would encourage people, if you feel drawn to drop in. It will be time well spent. It is an amazing thing that happens when we learn to just have a transparent relationship with what's really going on inside of us, and to honor it, and to realize that this system is built to set you free. If you use the system and this body and the mind and the breath together, and really understanding these realms of the inner self, the inner child, the soulful self, and these higher realms of our higher self and higher guidance, recognize that all of that is meant to come together in your favor. And so it's
Yeah,
always
that's
just a
right.
blessing. Yeah.
And you know what? Many of my clients love your work, do your work, tell me, "Oh my god, I love what Dr. Sue's doing." I think our work complements each other in many ways.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Beautifully. So, Margaret, is there any last little word of wisdom that you would like to share?
Well, what I want people to know is that really anybody can learn this. It's not an instant process. It's like learning anything, it takes practice, like learning to play the piano takes practice, and this takes practice. But anybody can learn to take loving care of themselves, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Margaret. It is amazing always to be with you. It's so beautiful. And I love that you are so passionate about what you're doing, and that you're bridging these worlds of personal thought processes, beliefs, and loving oneself, and the worlds of taking care of yourself, and the uplifting, alkalizing nutrition, because I too know that those two things are so interrelated that people would be shocked and surprised to see how much easier it is to do either end of that, when they begin just looking at both of them as a possibility. So a beautiful conversation. So okay, so thank you all for joining us, and thank you all listeners for being with us today. And it's been such a joy to have this conversation with Margaret. Margaret, I can't wait until we get to speak again together. And so before I wrap up, I'd love for you all to recognize that connecting with your deep self is the single most important thing that you can do in your life. It's going to change your ability to, have the job, the vocation that you want. It's going to improve your ability to have the relationship that you want, your ability to have the good health that you want, is to truly step into this type of integration. So you can find Dr. Margaret's latest work and offerings through the link that is here in the show notes that we've spoken about, and know that that you are in good hands. All right. So I'm so excited to share all of this with you. And I also want to mention while we're here, my new book, The Anatomy of Awakening, is now available. We can find The Anatomy of Awakening wherever books are sold, and we'll include a link in the show notes for you to get a copy of that today as well. It is definitely focused on how to generate the vibrational frequency of love within, because it is our direct connection to Source and recognizing the truth of who we are. So, thank you to our listeners again for spending this time with us today. The Art of Awakening podcast is where we blend science and spirituality to empower you to create the life that you truly love living. So until next time, I'm Dr. Sue Morter. Blessings, blessings to you all.